That concludes the election overview. There will be some time at the end of the session to answer any questions you may have. Now, we will move on to the focus of today's session: complaints, campaigning and regulation. As we go, remember to use the Q&A function if you have any questions. In this portion of the webinar, we'll be covering electoral campaign material and authorisation requirements, campaigning outside voting centres including visitor registration, complaints and the escalation process, and how the VEC regulates state elections. You can campaign at any time, even before the official start of the election period. There are strict rules governing campaigning activities, including authorisation of campaign material, distributing material outside voting centres, and voting centre signage limits.
Please keep in mind that all non-electoral laws still apply. For example, defamation laws and local council laws regarding use of public spaces or signage. Also, you must not distribute material that is likely to mislead voters into voting incorrectly.
Electoral matter is something that is intended to affect or influence the way someone votes in an election, regardless of whether it makes an express reference to the election or voting. Electoral material must be authorised and includes any of the following: an advertisement that contains electoral matter and is or is to be paid for, printed material that contains electoral matter, or material that is produced by or on behalf of a registered political party, candidate or elected member. Paid advertisements and non-printed material may appear digitally or online. Electoral material can take many forms, including a leaflet, flyer, pamphlet, notice or poster, a billboard or sign, a print, digital or online advertisement, a social media post or profile, a website, or some electronic communications such as email or SMS. Material made expressly for academic, artistic, educational or satirical purposes that is not intended or likely to affect voting in an election is not regulated by the VEC.
While authorisation requirements apply all the time, proximity to an election is a relevant factor in considering whether material is intended or likely to affect the way someone votes in an election. For example, material distributed within 4 weeks of the issue of the writs would have a much stronger likelihood of influencing voting than material distributed earlier in an election cycle.
If you are sharing electoral material, you must ensure it is authorised. Authorisation requirements apply to everyone, not just candidates, political parties and members of Parliament. They exist to enhance electoral transparency and trust by helping the public to know the origins of electoral material and to allow someone to decide for themselves how much they value or trust the electoral material. Electoral material must always be authorised, regardless of whether there is an election occurring. This is particularly relevant for registered political parties and elected members that publish or distribute electoral material more often outside of election cycles. To authorise means to include a person's name and address on the electoral material. The name and address form an authorisation statement. The authorising person can be a natural person, a body corporate, or a body politic, including a registered political party, company, or organisation.
For electoral material published or distributed online, the authorisation statement must be easy to locate. A website, for example, may contain the authorisation statement as a footer or be on the About page. On social media, posts can be authorised by including an authorisation statement in a post pinned to the top of the author's social media feed or appearing on the About section of the author's page. Posts can also link to a website which contains an authorisation statement. The full name of the person, body corporate or body politic that authorised the electoral material is required, so please use a name that you are generally known by, which can be easily identified by the public.
You must include a physical address on the authorisation statement. And while it should include your usual address as the authorising person, it does not necessarily need to be your residential address. You can use the address of an office, such as a company or business address, or the address of an election campaign office. An address cannot be a post office box, an email, a domain name, URL or similar, or for a vacant parcel of land at the time of authorisation. As the authorising person, you will need to have ad hoc access to the address.
In addition to the authorisation requirements for electoral material, all How to Vote cards also require the printer's details included alongside the authorisation statement. The requirement for printer details is now only needed for How to Vote cards. Authorisation requirements in further detail can be found on our website and in the Candidate Handbook.
Campaigning outside voting centres is a key feature of in-person elections in Victoria. And it's important for candidates and anyone canvassing near a voting centre to be aware of the rules that apply at early, mobile and election day voting centres. During voting hours, an official VEC sign denoting the designated entrance will be displayed at each voting centre. Sometimes the VEC might find it necessary to designate a secondary entrance. In the event this is required, the secondary entrance will also be identified with an official designated entrance sign. All canvassing and signage rules which apply to the primary designated entrance also apply to the secondary designated entrance. The Electoral Act sets out conduct within certain distances from the entrance of a voting centre during the hours of voting. These can be broken down into the 6 metre rule, the 100 metre rule, as well as the 400 metre rule on election day.
Firstly, the 6 metre rule. During the hours of voting, a person must not canvass or campaign within 6 metres of a designated entrance to a voting centre. You may not exhibit a notice or a sign, and you may not conduct an exit poll within 6 metres of the designated entrance. This includes handing out How to Vote cards, asking for the vote of an elector, or telling an elector not to vote for a particular candidate, or not to vote at all. The VEC may reduce this distance for reasons like inclement weather, but any reduction in the 6 metre rule will be signposted. At all other times, the 6 metre rule always applies.
Next is the 100 metre rule. Within 100 metres of the designated entrance is the limited sign zone, where strict rules apply to what can be displayed. Mobile billboards are prohibited in the limited sign zone. A mobile billboard is any billboard capable of being displayed while being transported by any means. This includes billboards attached to vehicles such as bicycles or cars, vehicles that are painted or vinyl wrapped, and billboards that can be worn by a person or animal. The only election-related signs that are permitted to be displayed within the limited sign zone during the hours of voting are official signs of the VEC or signs displayed by a candidate or political party for the election within their permitted allocation. Each candidate can display up to 2 signs. If you are an independent candidate, you may only have 2 signs in a limited sign zone. Where a registered political party has endorsed 2 or more candidates for the Legislative Council region election, these candidates may have up to 2 signs in total among them. Each registered political party may display an additional 2 signs. Any notice or sign must not exceed 600mm by 900mm in size. As a candidate, you cannot display signage in a limited sign zone for a voting centre in a Legislative Assembly district or Legislative Council region that you have not nominated for, unless that voting centre has been appointed as a joint voting centre that includes the district or region that you have nominated for. During the hours of voting, election officials are allowed to remove a notice or sign if it does not comply with the requirements.
And finally, the 400 metre rule. On election day, during the hours of voting, the only printed electoral material that may be distributed or made available within the 400 metre zone are registered How to Vote cards. No other printed electoral material may be distributed or made available. Further information on the distribution of electoral material and specifications on signage can be found in the most recent Candidate Handbook and in the upcoming Campaigner Handbook.
The VEC has a duty under the Occupational Health and Safety Act to reduce risks as far as reasonably practicable for visitors attending premises that we manage. As part of our risk management approach, the VEC requests that all contractors, campaigners and other visitors voluntarily register their attendance at all early and election day voting centres. Registration is not mandatory and does not apply to VEC staff or voters attending a voting centre for the purpose of voting.
Visitors to any voting centre, excluding voters, will receive a briefing from the voting centre manager. The briefing will cover entrances and exits for the venue, the 6 metre, 100 metre and 400 metre boundaries and the rules for campaigning, where the emergency evacuation point is located, and a reminder to be respectful and safe around voters, election staff and each other. Visitors who choose to register will be asked to complete a form with their names and the details of an emergency contact person. Registration will be requested at each venue they attend each day.
Voting centre managers will aim to engage with the campaigners to establish rapport and to encourage cooperation outside voting centres. We ask everyone to help ensure a respectful and safe environment outside and in voting centres so that voters are not obstructed or intimidated.
The VEC relies on the goodwill of public venues to be used as voting centres. So please remain considerate of these public spaces and ensure that your campaigners are as well. Make sure to be attentive to any local restrictions requested by venue owners and the VEC regarding the placement of personnel, notices or signs to ensure that canvassing does not interfere with any other activities at the public venue. Ensure workers and materials do not impede or intimidate people moving in and out of the venue or neighbouring properties. And ensure the complete removal of signs and equipment before leaving the venue at the end of each day. Voting centre managers will request cooperation from all involved in the first instance and may escalate the issue to the election manager if it cannot be resolved. The election managers and officials have the power and authority to request the removal of any person who obstructs the approaches, in other words, the pathways and entrances to a voting centre, willfully or unnecessarily obstructs or delays the proceedings at a voting centre, behaves in a disorderly manner, or causes a disturbance. If you or your campaigners encounter poor behaviour at a voting centre, please report it to election officials straight away. You can also report it to our complaints team via our website.
For the state election this year, in addition to the managers and election officials you've already heard about, the VEC will also have an increased field presence. Compliance officers will monitor behaviour outside voting centres during voting hours. These officers are specially trained election officials who will work to ensure that everyone around a voting centre is complying with their obligations. Their focus will be on generating cooperation consistent with the VEC's constructive compliance approach and facilitating prompt escalation and referral for more complex matters that cannot be resolved locally. Managing complaints and feedback is an important component of conducting an election. Feedback and complaints must be submitted in writing, either through the submission form or by email or post. Complaints lodged with election managers that require escalation will be forwarded to the VEC head office for consideration and response. Any feedback or complaint made in writing will be reviewed by the VEC and may be referred for investigation.
Please note that if the VEC does refer the matter to another regulator, we will advise you that the matter has been referred and we will tell you which regulator it's been referred to.
The VEC does more than just run elections. We are also the regulator of Victoria's electoral environment. We're responsible for regulating electoral participants, voters, candidates and campaigners, registered political parties and others to safeguard free and fair elections and ensure transparency in electoral processes. This is critical for delivering elections with integrity and results that can be trusted. We regulate compliance with the rules which apply to various aspects of elections, including enrolment and voting, candidate nominations, political party registration processes, authorisation of electoral campaign material, conduct during election periods, and compulsory voting.
We are the regulator for all participants in state electoral processes, and we assess and investigate compliance with the Electoral Act. And we may take action on offences that we identify in relation to state electoral processes. We also work closely with other regulators, integrity agencies and law enforcement agencies, including Victoria Police. For state elections, we coordinate closely with Victoria Police to ensure information and referrals can be passed on quickly. For more information, see the How We Regulate page of the VEC website.
That concludes the deep dive into campaigning, complaints and regulation. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function now. If you are having trouble with the Q&A function, use the link posted in the chat or email your question to candidateservices@vec.vic.gov.au. For any questions that come through that relate to individual circumstances or are of a technical nature, we will take them on notice and get back to you directly in the coming days. We'll now go to the questions.
Okay, so first question I can see relates to authorisation. The question is, what kinds of material don't need authorisation? Okay, good question. Anything that isn't considered electoral material doesn't need to be authorised. And importantly, there are some exemptions in the laws from what's considered electoral material. I'll give you some examples of these exemptions. Small car stickers, lapel buttons, badges, clothing, fridge magnets, pens, pencils and balloons, opinion polls or other research relating to voting intentions, personal communications, internal communications of a party candidate or member of parliament, images of excluded items unless those images are transformed into electoral material, and as we've said earlier, material made for academic, artistic, educational or satirical purposes that's not intended or likely to affect voting in an election is also not regulated by VEC.
The next question also relates to electoral material. Can we run electoral material past the VEC to check if it meets the requirements before we distribute it? It's also a very good question. So the VEC can't provide legal advice or pre-approve electoral material, but we may be able to answer some questions you have about your electoral material or some of the specific requirements, but you may wish to also seek independent legal advice. And as we've said throughout the session, if in doubt, it's best to add an authorisation statement.
Okay, next question is about how to vote cards. Can we hand out how to vote cards outside mobile voting centres? Okay, so the answer is yes. A mobile voting centre has a designated entrance just like any other voting centre, and you may hand out your how to vote cards as long as this is outside the 6 metre zone, which we talked about earlier. However, mobile voting teams will carry folders of all registered how to vote cards, and some mobile voting sites, including all low sensory mobile voting centres, will also display a QR code linking to all registered how to vote cards on the VEC website.
What is about the VEC powers? What kinds of powers does VEC have to prevent an act in inappropriate or inappropriate conduct? So election managers and election officials have the powers to request handing over how to vote cards, which must be complied with. That request must be complied with. I think we've gone through a couple of these, but they can cause someone to be removed from an election venue if they are obstructing entries, hindering proceedings, behaving in a disorderly manner, or disrupting the peace. And they can remove signs being displayed in breach of those signage rules that we went through in detail earlier. And in line with the VEC's constructive compliance approach, we will educate and guide and resolve where appropriate. However, we can also prosecute breaches of the Act as well.
Just waiting for the next one to come up. Oh, I think we just missed one. Why don't we go back and, yeah, there it is. Fantastic. Will visitor registration be required for non-campaigners? Well, this might be a bit of a trick question because visitor registration is voluntary for all of the visitors that we're inviting to register with us. The VC encourages registration for all visitors other than voters.
When can we start campaigning? You can campaign at any time, even before the official start of the election period. But as we've gone through, there are strict rules governing campaigning activities, including authorisation of campaign material, distributing material outside voting centres, and voting centre signage limits. The areas that will receive the greatest attention, as you can probably expect, are outside voting centres during the hours of voting.
Okay, next question is also about campaigning. Is it considered campaigning if you're not doing it in the vicinity of a voting centre? So if, for example, if you are campaigning at a shopping centre, well, yes, campaigning can of course take place anywhere, but as Daniela was talking about, there are some offences under electoral legislation that are specific to being in the vicinity of the voting centre when campaigning. And those offences relate to signage. Other offences can apply more broadly, even when you're not in the vicinity of the voting centre, regardless of location, such as those related to misleading and deceptive material, for example.
If we get how to vote cards registered by the VC, can copies of it be distributed at early voting centres? Can copies of it distributed at early voting centres include the registered by line? Yes, it can. If it has been registered, it can include it.
Great. Next question is, how early is candidate helper available prior to the election? Great, good question. I'm glad you're interested in Candidate Helper. It's a really important resource, so fantastic that you're showing an interest. Candidate Helper is available for independent candidates from Wednesday the 21st of October, which is 2 weeks before nominations open. Just a reminder, while we're talking about Candidate Helper, it's a fantastic resource to help you complete the nomination form, but you still need to attend your appointment to lodge the nomination form. Isn't that right, Daniela? Yeah. Just waiting for the next question to come up. There's another question about timing of campaign material. I think we answered that one before. When can we start letterboxing of campaign material before nominations? I don't think we restrict that, do we, Daniela?
You can campaign anytime. That includes letterboxing.
Let's have a look. What else we've got here? Are visitor registration forms available for download and filled prior to arriving at polling centre? We'll be providing more details closer to the election on how the visitor registration process will work, including how to access forms. Just waiting to see if there's any more questions. None so far.
Can pop them in, use the Q&A function.
But of course, if you haven't got any more right now, that's no problem at all, because as we mentioned at the beginning of the session, you can also send them through to us, right, to answer at another time. Yeah.
No further questions.
No further questions.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your questions. Great questions that came through. That concludes today's information session. Here are the key dates on screen once more for you all. Remember to make sure you're familiar with the rules before you begin campaigning. Download the candidate handbook from our website for more information. If this briefing has raised any questions that were not covered, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us anytime or contact your election manager from Tuesday the 3rd of November when election offices open.
Join us for additional deep dives into topics specific to candidates and parties at the election at later webinars. You can view the information session schedule and you can register on the VEC website. And thanks again for joining us today.